Hey guys, Thrasher here, and it's time for my late June tier list. Let's talk about it right now. Okay, so first up, before we jump into the tier list, I want to cover a few very important points that I've shown this tier list to one or two people to try and get some feedback, and most people didn't understand right away. So first up, any character you see in a tier that is not the Z tier is placed there arbitrarily. They're not placed in order because the idea behind this whole tier list is that all of these characters are placed in tiers based on how much they affect the meta and how much of an impact they can have on matches. It's not Unit A versus Unit B, it's how much impact does Unit A have on any team you could run versus Unit B on any team you could run. So don't look at them in a vacuum like it's A versus B, it's A in the entire meta of everything going on versus B in the entire meta of everything going on. So keep that in mind. If you see a unit that's in, say, the B tier, and they're to the right of a unit in the B tier that you think is worse, it's not because that's a worse unit in the B tier, it's because the B tier as a whole are units that bring about the same amount of impact. While one unit might be slightly better than the other unit, on the whole of the entire meta, those units have the same general impact within their team. So let's go ahead and jump into it now. First is the D tier. These are units that essentially have no impact in the meta. You wouldn't really use them on your team. There are very few teams that you would ever run them on for any reason. They're the next characters that are up for balance changes, and one thing you'll want to notice here is almost every single character that was balance changed recently was either in the D tier, I think there was one in the C tier, and all of them have moved up to either A tier or higher. Only one is in the A tier, the rest are S or S+. So let's move on to the C tier. These are also units that are generally not used on teams. There are very few cases where you would actually want to run them, but the difference between C tier and D tier is every once in a great while there is a reason to run these units, or generally they're just better than D tier units overall, but normally you will not see them in PvP. Let's move into the B tier. B tier units are units that do still have a tiny bit of viability, but generally they don't have the damage output or the survivability necessary to make them actually usable in high level PvP. Some of them do have reasonably good kits. They do have certain abilities that can allow them to help you in certain situations, but because their stats are so poor, they really can't be used with any regularity. So let's move into the A tier. The A tier is where we get our first real shakeup in this tier list. You'll notice that a few units that were in the S tier have moved down to A, and then one unit specifically got a character balance change in the Heart Virus Goku has moved all the way up to the A tier from the D tier, the lowest tier in the game. Now, the problem here is this Goku is still a rushdown unit, so you know exactly what he's going to do. Someone's going to bring him in and immediately use him, so all you have to do is make sure you're using a strategy that can kind of nullify that strategy. Make sure you start with a red unit, make sure you start with a unit that can stop him, and his actual buffs were not large enough to propel him up into the S tier where you would want to use him over lots of other units. In most cases where you would use the Heart Virus Goku, there's almost always a better option, and that's kind of why he sits there. As far as the other units that have moved down into the A tier, it's simply just that there are lots of units that have moved the meta around a little bit, and these units are not highly sought after anymore, and their stats are starting to really show some wear and tear. A good example of that is the Janemba, who still has an absolutely fantastic green card, but the problem is his stats are not great anymore. He can't do a lot of damage, he's not super tanky unless he's actually using his green card on a blast of some kind, so that's the issue that those characters are running into. Now let's move into the upper tiers, the S tier. S tier units have reasonably good stats and generally quality kits. These are units that you would want to use on most teams, unless they're a super stacked team where there's lots of S+ or Z tier characters in that specific layout. Now, you'll notice that our second of the 5 character balance changes has wound up in the S tier, and that is the Blaster Vegeta, Scouter Vegeta, whatever you want to call him. He does a ton of damage now, and he does have a bonus extra buff to Sun Family, which is still an absolute top tier team, which is nice. The problem is he's still reasonably fragile, and the only team that you would really run him on right now is maybe Frieza Force and maybe Saiyan, and in both of those cases there are options that are considerably better than he is, but if you don't have a better option, he is still a very viable and powerful unit that you can use. So let's move into the S+ tier. Okay, so in the S+ tier, that's probably where our largest shakeup is so far. You see the Purple Broly is here. You see that all 3 of our other character balance change characters are here. The Red Super Saiyan Vegeta got some phenomenal buffs. The only issue is, in most cases where you would use him, whether it's with a Super Saiyan team or it's a Saiyan team, he generally has there are some better options that you can run instead of him, and he doesn't really fit on an absolute top tier team right now, so that's holding him back a little bit. And next to him, you'll notice the Android 17. The Android 17 is an absolutely phenomenal unit right now. The problem is the Android team has not really come back into the meta yet. We do have Perfect Form Cell, we do have this Android 17. If we can get a third Android, then that team could really be a force to be reckoned with, and the Android 17 might even move up into Z tier, because he is a great unit with a great kit. He just needs a little extra support. And then the third one is the Pod Frieza. The Pod Frieza can do an absolute ton of damage now. Frieza Force is starting to really be a PvP viable team, as well as the Lineage of Evil team. You could also run sort of a hybrid there that's Frieza Force and Lineage of Evil, and that team does well too, and that's why he's sitting where he is. So let's move into the absolute top tier units, the Z tier. In 7th place is the legendary finish Purple Goten from the Family Kamehameha. He has immense damage potential. He has a great green card that allows him to switch Strike Arts into Blast Arts. He fits on multiple teams that are very powerful, mainly the Sun family. He is one of the 3 optimal units for that team, and assuming you have the fully optimal version of that team, you have, if not the first, probably the second best team in the game. Outside of that, you could also run him on Hybrid Saiyans or Super Saiyan, and he will give either of those teams immense damage increases, which allows him to really bring multiple teams that weren't the greatest before, or at least not the greatest for the last couple seasons, back into prominence if you want to utilize this character. So let's move on to number 6. Gogeta from the Broly movie. He has an absolute ton of damage potential. The issue with this character is that he doesn't have a lot outside of his actual damage potential. He does a lot of things to increase damage for himself. He does have the ability to heal one time when he transforms. He's got a 20% heal, but he is reasonably flimsy, especially when compared to most of the other Z tier characters, and you're not going to see a lot of actual utility out of this character. So if you don't get a ton of damage out of him, he's not going to be bringing a ton more to the team. With that being said, his damage potential alone does allow him to really change the flow of most battles and pretty much delete most characters, especially if you use a special move. Also, he is an optimal unit on one of the best teams in the game right now, Fusion. You want to run Fusion with this guy specifically. If you don't have this character, then Fusion falls off pretty considerably. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's move on to number 5. Perfect Form Cell. This character has fallen off a little bit because the Android and the Regeneration teams are not absolute top tier teams right now. It looks like that might actually change with the Android team in the near future, because the Android 17 just got a massive buff, and it looks like we're getting more Android teams possibly next week. Now, with that being said, this is still a fantastic unit. He has a green card that increases his strike damage when you get hit with it. You can also do a lot of damage immediately after. His Ultimate Arts card does a ton of damage. He has a Cover Rescue, which allows you to stop either a long combo or an Ultimate Arts card or even a Rising Rush. He regenerates health over time, which makes him a very durable unit. He also reduces the cost of his Blast Arts cards, which allows you to pump out more damage or at least use more cards during a combo. And he seals an opponent's card when he first comes onto the battlefield each time, which can be very annoying for your opponent and gives a pretty distinct advantage. So this is still a phenomenal unit. Let's move on to number 4. Super Saiyan Blue Goku. This is a very tanky, durable unit. He has a 35% damage reduction for the first 45 counts of battle. Anytime he uses the green card, he gets a ton of keyback and he gets a good amount of health. He has very good damage potential. He slowly increases the damage that he does over time, and his Ultimate Arts card can do an absolute ton of damage to most opponents. Beyond that, he can fit on multiple teams. Obviously, he fits on the God Key team, which is his most important and top team at the moment, but he also fits well in Sun Family. He sits very comfortably in the Saiyan team. And one thing to mention here, I know a lot of people are going to notice that the Goku is ranked fairly high and the Super Saiyan Blue Vegeta is not ranked quite as high. I want to point out that the Super Saiyan Blue Vegeta is as high as he can be ranked without actually being in Z tier. The main reason for that is the simple fact that the Vegeta does not fit on as many teams as this Goku, and the Goku's survivability is what really brings out the potential of a lot of teams that he's on, whereas the Vegeta really only helps the God Key team. There are lots of other teams that he can sort of fit on, but he's not giving a lot to those teams because what he's doing is locking those teams in, and the other teams that he's on don't have a ton of damage potential, whereas the God Key team does, but this Goku is already on that team. And that's sort of the flexibility of the characters, the teams that they fit on, and that's why this guy is reasonably higher than the Vegeta, even though if you look at them one-to-one comparison, some might actually say the Super Saiyan Blue Vegeta is a better unit by himself than this Goku might be. But keep in mind, we're talking about the meta, not one-to-one units. So now let's look at the third unit. Golden Frieza. At 5 stars, he has an absolutely phenomenal Z ability for Lineage of Evil and Frieza Force. He is the crown jewel of the Frieza Force team if you're running that team, which has finally come back into prominence with the balance changes. He does a ton of damage. He is a bit of a rushdown unit in that a lot of his damage falls off after, I believe, 60 counts, but most battles end around 60 counts or less. There aren't very many that'll go too much longer than that, and at that point, he's probably done most of the damage that he needs to do anyway. Beyond that, he has a bonus damage buff to Saiyan characters, which many of the top tier characters are Saiyan. If you run Sun Family, there are a few that are not, but it is a nice buff to have. Secondarily, his kit gives him a very nice Ki recovery, and every time he enters the battlefield, he increases the damage that the opponent is going to take from any of your characters, as well as reducing their Ki recovery. So he can also be used slightly as a support unit, which is nice to see a unit that can do a ton of damage and has some support abilities that allow you to power up your other units on the team. So let's move into number 2, Super Vegito. Now, before I talk about this character's kit and how amazing the character is, I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for the number 1 ranked character and this number 2 ranked character. Some people will say that he should be higher. I want to point out that we're looking at the meta yet again. While this is a great character that fits on a few teams, he obviously fits on fusions. You can put him on the Super Saiyan team, you can put him on the Saiyan team. Generally, in most teams that he's on, he's fantastic, but you need 1 or 2 other very specific units to make this an absolutely phenomenal unit on a top tier team. He's always phenomenal by himself. Now let's talk about the unit himself. Basically, anytime your opponent uses a card, he's going to get a huge buff. In most cases, it's a damage buff. If they use a green card, he's going to get a Ki recovery buff. He also gets the ability to stop your opponent's combo. If they happen to start a combo, you then cover change into this guy when they're using a Strike Arts card. He'll kick them back, and you can then do whatever you need to do. It's very powerful. And another thing to take note of is the fact that he does get bonus damage against regeneration characters, although that's not massive at the moment because regen is not an absolute top team. It is still a good team. One more thing to keep in mind is he does heal himself and give himself Ki when he uses his main ability, which draws his Ultimate Arts card, which is a legendary finish, does an absolute ton of damage, and looks super cool when you kill your opponent with it. And while he is a good damage dealer and can be exceptionally tanky when you use his green card, which allows you to reduce damage received for, I believe, 20 counts, there are some cases where there's a unit that outshines him. So let's talk about number 1. Father-Son Kamehameha Gohan. Without a doubt, the best anchor unit in the game right now. His ultimate ability allows you to pretty much delete most characters. Most people consider it essentially a second Rising Rush. And at this point in the game, a second Rising Rush means that you have a huge advantage over your opponent. When you use his main ability, he heals, which is awesome. He has cover damage reduction when you switch him in to cover change him during a combo, which is very nice, and it increases his blast damage. Beyond that, every time he uses a blast card, he gets a blast damage buff. This unit can pump out some insane numbers. If you have any top tier Goku on your team, that Ultimate Arts card truly does become a Rising Rush. He also gets huge buffs every single time one of your allies dies. So if he is the last character on the team, he's going to get something like a 60% damage buff and an increase to his Ki recovery. He is a phenomenal unit. Now, with that being said, some people will still say the Super Vegito is a better unit. Now, if you compare them 1-to-1, that's possibly true. But if you look at the meta and the way that these characters work on their specific teams and how you need to build teams out to make these characters reach their full potential, it's pretty obvious that you should place this character higher, and here's why. Think about it this way. For the Super Vegito to shine and truly have a top tier team, there are 1 or 2 very specific characters that you have to run on 1 or 2 very specific teams. Generally, the 2 top tier teams that you could run him on, one is the Fusions team, where you must have the Gogeta, and then you must have a very high quality third fusion option. The other option is the Super Saiyan team, where you must run this Vegito, you must run Super Saiyan Bardock, and then you must have a third option that is an absolutely phenomenal Super Saiyan character. As far as this Gohan goes, all you need to have this be a truly top tier team is you need this Gohan, you need any reasonably top tier Goku. So any Goku that is S tier or above, any Goku that you see on the screen right now will pretty much make this a top tier Gohan on the Sun Family team. You can also run him on the Hybrids team. So the simple fact that he has that extreme flexibility that it still allows him to perform at the highest levels means that generally in the meta, this is a slightly better character right now. And that's pretty much it for this video. If you guys disagree with anything, if you think stuff should be moved around, throw it down below because I want to hear it. And if you like this content, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.